So, first of all, I want to talk about how, in many ways, technology has actually boosted productivity, or seemingly so anyway. But in just as many ways, people are arguing that it's outstripped our ability to use it. If everyone has the tech, how can anyone get competitive advantage? And what only happens when people actually leverage it. They're utilizing a productive thought process as well. A great hammer doesn't actually make a great carpenter, is the analogy here. But a great carpenter knows how to use the hammer. David Allen, we have a treat for you today. He's coming up to speak to us, or speak with me and you guys. He's done pioneering research and coaching and education of some of the world's highest performing professionals, and he's earned him Forbes' recognition as one of the top 5 executive coaches around, and also one of the top 100 thought leaders by Leadership magazine. Fast Company even hailed David as one of the world's most influential thinkers in the arena of personal productivity for his outstanding programs and writing on time and stress management as well, and the power of aligned focus and vision, and his groundbreaking methodologies in management and executive peak performance. This is your chance to ask David whatever you would like regarding how to be more productive. But first of all, let's bring David up and give him a welcome applause, please. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Jerry.
Please sit down.
Thank you.
So let's start with your own introduction about your specializations and what it is actually you offer.
Well, I spent the last 40 years trying to figure out how to be as lazy as I could be and spend as little time as needed to be to get stuff done. So, and I'm into clear space. You know, my history of spiritual practices, meditation, black belt in karate, taught me a lot about how practical it was to have no distractions. But as I started my own consulting practice back in 1982, I saw my life was getting more complex and busier, and it was starting to screw up my clear space. So I got very hungry myself to say, okay, what are the things I need to learn so I can stay focused on the meaningful stuff without being distracted by any of that? And I didn't wake up one morning with this whole methodology. It was piece by piece. As I say, it's a string of epiphanettes. Aha, that worked. Ah, that worked. That worked. And I began to sort of put this together into a methodology, and then it turned out that I was using it with my consulting clients. We didn't call it coaching back then. It was just consulting for, startups and small businesses that were in my network. And it produced the same results for them it did for me. More clarity, more focus, more room to focus on the meaningful stuff. I went, wow, that's cool. So it became sort of a core methodology that I was teaching, and then some big guy in the big corporate training world saw what I was doing and said, David, we need that result in our whole culture. Can you design some sort of training around what you've come up with? And I said, okay. So we did a pilot program. I spent a couple of months and designed a 2-day seminar in personal productivity around this stuff that I'd uncovered, and it was a hit. We did a pilot program for 1,000 executives and managers in Lockheed, 1983-84, and I suddenly found myself thrust into the corporate training world. It's like, Jesus, I was an American intellectual history major in Berkeley in 1968. If you'd have told me I'd been in the corporate training world, I'd say, what are you smoking? Come on, give me a break. But I turned out that was the hungriest audience for what I'd come up with. They had money to pay for it. And that was, the early 80s, the mid to senior level professionals were getting hit with the tsunami of email and corporate change and flattened organizations and a lot of that kind of stuff. And so, this stuff hit a nerve. Now, frankly, I've never had any formal traditional training in time management, business, or psychology. This is all street smarts that I came up with. And then after 20 years of training hundreds of thousands of people, mostly in the US corporate training world, and spending literally thousands of hours one-on-one. You'd be a senior executive and you heard about my stuff. You say, David, come sit down next to me at my desk and let's get this done. And so, that's kind of where I got my chops, is doing all that. It took me 20 years, Jeremy, to figure out what I'd figured out, and that nobody else seemed to have done it the same way. So some folks said, David, you ought to write the book. So I wrote Getting Things Done, published 2001. I had no idea whether anybody was going to buy it or not. Time management was already kind of a noisy market out there, and I said, we'll see. I just needed to get it out of my head. I needed to write the manual in case I got run over by a bus. At least somebody could pick it up and figure out what I'd figured out. And it hit a nerve. Now 2 million copies sold, 30 languages, spread around the world, created the life hack movement. And who knew? It could have fooled me. So that's pretty much what was my game, was trying to figure out what are the best practices that any individual, especially high-performing individuals, could utilize that we're not born doing. They're not hard. It's not like a foreign language or some new technology. They're really behaviors or practices most people do a little bit of anyway. So it's not like they have to learn something totally new, but very few people do it consistently. So I've just figured out how you could be busy in a complex, fast-changing, surprising world and have nothing on your mind except whatever you're focused on. So that's my game.
Do you think that you mentioned the lack of formal training, do you think that was actually a bonus, a plus?
Yes. I had no preconditioning about what it should be. So I think that's that's probably for anybody, if you're totally, walk in and just say, I just need to figure out what works.
And you mentioned obviously being at Berkeley in history as well. That's one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, you've been doing this a long time, and has this definition of productivity changed over the years anyway?
Well, it depends on what you mean by productivity. See, unfortunately, productivity as a word has a lot of baggage. A lot of people say, God, that means work harder, sweat more, Look, productivity simply means produce whatever desired result or experience you want to produce. If you go to a party to boogie and you don't boogie, it's an unproductive party, right? If you guys go to have fun and you don't have fun, you're being unproductive. So productivity, if you think of it that way, that hasn't changed. Everybody wants, okay, here's what I want to do. It's not done yet. How do I get from here to there as efficiently and effectively as possible? And that's a universal principle, I think. I don't think that's going to change 100 years from now.
And so, with this idea of if the core issue of productivity hasn't changed, how is the bearing of more technology or increased technology coming into this had any bearing in your view of whether corporations or individuals can be productive or not? If the core values haven't changed, yet all this technology has arrived, what's happened?
Well, the technology to a large degree has outrun people's ability to use it. I'm sorry. Hi, welcome to our company. Now you have Slack, you have Outlook, you have WhatsApp, you have Asana. And you can't even manage your own in-basket, much less 6. So people are just, they're in a swirl out there with all that stuff. So they haven't caught up to a large degree people's training about how to be a knowledge worker. How do you manage 6 incoming channels fast? People say, well, I'll just leave 1,500 emails in my email. Right, and what do? Take out half your garbage? Give me a break. Speed and volume has increased tremendously. So you could thank technology for that. But come on, guys. By the way, the definition of technology is anything that wasn't around when you were born. So many of you in here, you were born into Word, Excel, Outlook, email, and so forth. You don't even consider that technology. It's like the telephone, right? So if you mean by an increase, now, by the way, Word, Excel, those changed the world. They really did. I mean, could we be more productive? Absolutely. Using word processors and using spreadsheets made us a whole lot more productive. I just looked at the data. I'm not an economist, but the GDP keeps increasing 3%, 4%, 5% a year. So somehow the world keeps producing more, but people are burning out too. So I'm not sure that you would call that a productivity increase. Certainly, by the way, if you're the only person who had Word or Excel or Outlook and email, and none of your competitors did, you win. The problem is, they've all got it. So if you're talking about a competitive edge, you just need to keep up, right? So, wired and innovation, and that's your game. There are probably new things coming out every week, that could be potentially increasing in some way. But AI, give me a break. It's going to be a long time before it's going to decide what to buy your mother for her birthday.
Well, with that, before we go on to the AI and how those are actually being used in productivity, what was interesting to me is obviously we've got, like with this technology, and I wanted to get your view on how much it's actually mirroring old technology and what is actually new here. Like Mind Mapper is basically digital post-it notes. Word processing is basically a digital typewriter. How much are we recirculating existing ideas into a new format, and how much are you seeing that's genuinely new?
I haven't seen much anything new, really. I think a lot of experiments. I mean, I'm not a techie guy, really. Well, I'm kind of an end user tech. Anything small, black, high tech, and expensive, I want. But come on, what's my buy to use ratio? Come on, guys, what's your buy to use ratio for all that stuff? Mine was 10-to-1 for years. I buy it. I think it was going to be cool. But quite frankly, the Palm Pilot, nobody's beat that yet as a list manager. If you're old enough to remember the Palm Pilot, oh man, that was great. And I actually was involved in 2 versions of starting up and experimenting with seeing if we could get the getting things done, the GTD methodology, into a digital format. Neither one of them worked for several reasons. But we had, in 1996. In Soma in San Francisco, we had an office called Actioneer. We built software. And we actually got on stage and said, I need to call Fred on Friday, and you'd see it show up on a Post-it on the screen. Call Fred, automatically would go to the calls list, automatically put Fred's phone number on there. It's like, you still can't even do that. It's like, so the technology, and I guess to answer your question, it's just sped things up. So, they consider the telephone technology. They consider the automobile. They thought you'd die at 30 miles an hour. So all of that stuff was, kind of game-changing in a way, but all they were just speeding up the processes that people were involved in anyway.
I wonder if that's how you feel about, Wired wrote about Slack when it first came in, and it was touted very much as this answer to email. That clearly hasn't happened. Why do you think that's the case?
It's just bullshit. No, it is. Come on. You're not going to get rid of email. I've been on email since 1983. I live my life, I do my work through email. And so a lot of people are sort of letting go of Slack and letting go of Asana and letting go of all those other things simply because you have to agree on the protocols. And if you're dealing and engaging with other people, the key issue is getting your protocols clear. And so what really has worked in that regard would be good CRMs, where you're fired if you don't input your sales data into the software, because everybody needs to be able to see the software, see what's the latest thing that happened with the client in case the client calls. And so that actually worked because the protocols were pretty specific about how to make that work. So if you don't have very specific protocols, what's your agreement with your team about how often you're supposed to respond to Slack? Most people still look at all that stuff, and instead of going, that's reference, that's trash, I don't need that anymore, ooh, I need to take an action about that, and then they use their own personal systems to curate all that stuff coming through those channels into their own personal systems. But if people don't have good personal practices in terms of their own productivity, all that stuff is just adding insult to injury, frankly. I've seen a lot of it.
One of the things you mentioned there, obviously, is that looking at some of these technologies, it's like we still can't do this or we still can't do that. And some of the technology brought in, I think you've said before that, or that technology has outstripped the ability of people to use it. But my thinking from a Wired point of view is that any technology good technology should allow people, should work without people having to know how to use it. It should be sort of easy, it should be intuitive, as it were, rather than taking ages to be adopted here. So is your argument, it's not against the technology itself, it's just crap to use or difficult to use or not intuitive enough?
Yes. Kind of all the above. I mean, come on. A lot of people that are highly effective professionals, highly effective executives or whatever, they've just figured out they've sort of kludged together how they're using word processors, how they're using email, how they're using Evernote, how they're using all that other stuff. But there's a whole lot of it sitting out there they're just not taking advantage of because it would take too much effort to try to figure it out. Hey, anytime I ever go back and try to read a manual on Word, I go, oh God, I didn't know I could do that. There's all kinds of stuff that's built into these things that's extremely powerful. But you really need to just make sure that is the technology producing what they want, what they need. So the UI and the UX are really, really important. I think that's probably the biggest change that's happening is people are really understanding what happens to people when they sit down in this thing. How easy is it? Do I turn it on and then what happens? So I haven't seen a whole lot of that you don't have to still learn, and still spend some time. But come on, that's true with pretty much anything that's new out there. Trying to ride a bicycle in Amsterdam, 8 years ago. It took me 6 months before I felt comfortable, not being hit from what side, by who.
One thing that, watching your stuff online and reading some of your stuff as well, one thing I'm struck by is that it's the concept, the simple but effective concept of not keeping anything in your head, of writing stuff down, but not just writing simple lists, writing complicated, detailed instructions down, not complicated, detailed actions yourself. Yet also, when we spoke, chatting about what we might want to talk about, you mentioned about that you weren't a great fan of list managers and these sorts of applications. So I wanted to see, was there a disconnect between that, or if you could explain why these list managers aren't so great, but making lists, detailed lists, action points is such a viable process regardless of that technology.
Well, people have made lists for thousands of years. There's nothing new about externalizing your thinking and externalizing review and remember. Your head's just a shitty office, and that's the problem, is most people are still using their head to try to remember, remind, prioritize, and manage relationships between the complexities of their world. And most people's world is a lot more complex than they realize.
And that's why we have so many of these list programs now.
So many things to try to get a grip on that, but most people still have it in their head. The problem is if your list isn't complete, you don't trust your head nor the list. So now it just becomes too much work. Like, oh shit, it ain't worth it. So let me just keep it all in my head. Okay, go. Look, if you think you should keep it all in your head, throw away your calendar. Don't be intellectually dishonest. Why do you manage a calendar? Why do you even have one if you think your head can do it? Your head can't do it. I discovered your head's for having ideas, not for holding them. I discovered that 40 years ago. But the brain scientists in the last 10 years have now validated that the number of things you can actually keep in your head to remember, remind, prioritize, and manage the relationship between without becoming suboptimal cognitively, 4. That's it. They used to think 7, but I think that was probably before WhatsApp. I don't know. 4 is it. As soon as you try to manage more than 4 things, you're going to be driven pretty much by latest and loudest, not by strategic intuition. And don't shoot the messenger, guys. That's just now cognitive data.
Technology is being used quite heavily right now within organizations to monitor their staff to increase productivity. And in many ways to detrimental effects, where you get people leaving because of stress, they feel they're being monitored. There are actually instances where cameras are used to monitor how long you're at your station, how many keystrokes you use, whether you're using the mouse or not. Bathroom breaks, some companies don't pay you when you're not actually at your computer, so it costs you money to go to the bathroom. And these are big companies acting in this way. Is this something that are you finding more prevalent? And what do you think's wrong with it? And how are you, or is it?
Well, quite simply, rules are made when brains run out.
Okay.
I don't know. And, come on, the pandemic helped a lot because now they're not there, right? You can't walk around and go, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? You can actually have your feet up on your desk.
But some companies are using the pandemic as an excuse to monitor their staff remotely more closely, though.
Well, that's fine, but monitoring what? How much time you spend at the computer? So what? Come on, it comes down to the old thing. Are you paying for results? Or are you paying for activity? And so paying for results is simply the trouble is most people haven't defined what the result is that they're expecting from that job. What's your role? What's the purpose of that role? What's that role supposed to be producing, right? And then how do you monitor or manage that? And then some people have done that, and there are some things that actually measure, hey, here's how many widgets we produce today or whatever, but that's old Taylorism, back there just in terms of efficiency. And, the new work stuff, Lean, Agile, Six Sigma, Kanban, all those things were just managing the external workflow and adding efficiency to it and eliminating waste, good stuff. But my stuff was sort of, a good friend of mine who runs a Lean Institute in California, he said, David, getting things done is lean for the brain. Why think something twice, right? If cat food pops into your head more than once, you are inappropriately engaged with your cat. So, there should not be any reason to have any thought twice unless you just like having the thought. So that's, again, the methodology that I came up with, and most people haven't got that. They might catch it as an idea, but they haven't built the habit yet of doing it.
I'm not going to make the same mistake as last time. I'm going to go to questions now from the audience because we've only got about 9 minutes left, and there are loads of questions. So we'll go with the ones that have been upvoted the most. Productivity equals produce more. Not always we need to produce more, but produce better what we really need to produce. How can technology enable us to do this? So how can technology enable us to produce better rather than more?
Well, anything that allows you to do something with less effort is going to free up energy, so you can use that energy to make better results. But frankly, I disagree. Productivity, everybody's already producing. Everybody's already productive. You're producing exactly what you got, right? What most people mean by productivity is some increase, meaning for the amount of energy I'm putting into it, I'm getting more output, or I'm getting the same output with less energy input. That's the technical, those would be the technical definitions of productivity or a productivity increase. So sure, technology's made a huge difference. I could write shitty first drafts now in Word, that increases my ability to create a much better document, which I'm doing, when I go home tonight. So you can't fault any of that stuff. It's great stuff. And I read that 85% of the U.S. businesses use Excel instead of a bookkeeper. Come on. That's got to be an increase. When you say quality, well, you have to decide productivity could mean produce what? If you want to produce happiness and you're not happy, that's a quality that you're not producing, so you're being unproductive. So if you talk about productivity, meaning it has to be this at this level of quality or this level of game, then sure. Then you're either productive or not relative to your own definition about it. But that's up to your own definition.
One now the popular question here this afternoon is, what are the common or usual reasons why executives are resistant to change or innovation or use of technology, I suppose? And how have you found it best to sway executives to be open to change, to be more productive, I suppose?
Usually pain is the biggest change producer.
So they'll only do it when it hurts them.
Yeah, if it hurts bad enough, then they go, okay, how do I fix this? And hurt could get into some pretty subtle levels. It could be, gee, I'm not spending enough time with my daughter. Quality of my relationship with my kids is deteriorating given the other stuff. And so that sometimes will produce, very seldom. It can be that your inspiration will create a positive change. Wow. Here's a cool thing I really want to do. Yeah, but I'm not there yet. So it's I'm not there yet, but there's the there I want to be at can produce change if you need to change something in order to be able to make that happen. But for the most part, I think it's just people's, essentially, things fall below their standard, or they're raising their standards so that the world is not matching their standards. That's usually why people change. That's why people then manage. I keep my head empty for the same reason I brush my teeth and take showers. If I don't, it just feels too bad. So
How often do you find it the case where a company will proactively try and be more productive or bring in people like yourself to make them more productive rather than wait for a pain point or a problem issue to arise?
It depends on who's running the show and depends on them, because oftentimes it's their, at the top, the shadows are longer from the top, right? So if you find somebody who's really into a hard charger, being not in a negative way, but highly inspired, gangbusters, let's go, whatever, then they will tend to, produce a standard or hold a standard that people want to step up to match. The train's leaving, are you on board or not? So that happens as well. Probably not as often as, oh my God, we just got splintered in the marketplace, or just the technology just changed so much that our competition is just jumping ahead of us, and now we've got to do something different, or we now need to approach something different. So, or, somebody says, look, the quality of life in this company is not what it needs to be. We need to do something to, have better scores on our motivation. I was just reading a 2019 Gallup poll that 67% of corporate employees are not motivated and think that work is frustrating and shit, frankly.
That's
Excuse me, Jeremy
question.
and David, and I'm here in the front here, it's Andrew. May I interrupt for a second? I have a bit of news here. Unfortunately, Leo Kallahofen is not going to be able to be here today, and we're not going to be able to have that speech. It's nothing related to health or anything, I'm happy to say. I don't know anything more than that, but that does give us 10 more minutes or so here if you have more questions, if you don't mind adding a little bit more here. I think the audience might appreciate that.
Sure. I think I've said everything I know, but we could try.
That's it, yeah, exactly. It's not very productive of us, really, like spitting it out. But okay, we'll try.
Feel it out. There you go.
Yeah,
Thank you.
We'll try. That's actually something you were saying, David, there is actually relevant to one of the questions. Someone asks here, how do you think about the relationship between being productive and being happy? Is it always the case where being more productive means a more happy workforce?
I don't like the word happy. As happy as you get, that's as depressed as you'll get. I like the word satisfied. So I don't think, if I see high performers, they don't necessarily look happy, but they look satisfied. There's a satisfaction. I think if you go back to the etymology of the word, faction, fakery means to do. So a sufficient amount of doing creates a sense of, I think, a sense of confidence and a sense of peace. Nothing wrong with being happy, sure. I like being happy too, but it's ephemeral. Whereas I think there's a deeper sense of satisfaction, from doing good work, what you consider good work.
Coming back to the procurement industry, was obviously why we're here today. This is an interesting question. So far, most procurement suites of software implemented today have tended to increase workload. What would you advise to be for procurement providers on how to actually change this?
Hire more people, I guess. I don't know. If you say workload, is that the work? Is that the work to be done? If you're increasing workload that's crappy work or that shouldn't even be done, stop. How meaningful is the work that you're doing? If it's meaningful work that is fulfilling corporate mission and purpose, then you need all the manpower you need to do those things. So, increase. So, hey, we're producing more good stuff. Great, get some more good people. So do it even better.
What type of technology do you think has created the biggest productivity increase in general, or procurement specific? But what sort of technology are you approval of?
Well, I don't know. Come on, guys. Again, Word was world-changing. Excel was world-changing. The Internet's world-changing. Email was world-changing. I've used all of those since 1983, and still do. So I can't imagine not having those. So those were. I haven't seen anything really that hasn't done anything other than speed things up and add volume to what we're dealing with. I could be wrong, but again, you would know Jeremy better than me, given your position at Wired, about what's coming down the pike and what's out there in terms of technology. But I don't know. You seen anything other than things that speed up and volume?
Well, again, we talked very briefly earlier this morning about there's a piece of software called Luminance, which is specifically for the legal profession, where it supposedly, I haven't used it, but it supposedly reads long, complex legal documents and then spits out a report for your lawyer to say, these are the bits that require attention. And so like a 200-page legal document then will be like a 4-page report saying these are the bits. It's not meant to replace the lawyer, but it's meant to allow the lawyer to have more thinking time, more creativity time.
Yeah.
I have no idea whether these work or not, but are you seeing this in any other fields at all?
I haven't really. I mean, that would make sense that it does that, but again, you're still going to need the original document to go back to.
Yeah.
And how much are you going to trust the curation? You know, was it an accurate curation? And who was doing the curating?
And who's responsible if it's wrong?
Who's responsible if it's not done? And so, you know, I think where technology is going, which is cool, is decision support. So, you know, the technology is not going to tell you what to buy your mom, but it might tell you what you bought her before, what her favorite colors are, what her birthday is, you know, and so that would, hey, it's mom's birthday, bing, and suddenly, you know, you've got all kinds of data that could help you make a good decision about what you want to do. And I think that's where that's the future of technology, is decision support. You know, you walk into a room, it goes, hi, David, it's Friday afternoon. You usually have a beer about 3 o'clock, you want one. No, I mean, come on, guys, that's what the technology is going to be about, but it's not going to open the beer for you if you say, no, I don't want a beer. But it's going to give you the option. It's like, oh, hey, that's a good idea. Wow, yeah, I've had 14 good ideas after a beer on Friday afternoon, so let's go. So yeah, I think that's where, you know, the cool stuff will show up. Because what you just mentioned is decision support.
Yes.
Right, somebody has to, wow, I need to make some decision about all this. I don't have time to read 200 pages. Give me the curated, you know, version of it. So, you know, and then live and learn, see if it works.
An interesting quote that I read while doing some research for this was talking to somebody who was saying, because of about data, technology, measurement, decision support, it says, we're in this era of measurement, but we don't know what we should be measuring. I wanted to see what you thought we should be measuring if we're going to be talking about productivity.
I don't know. It's like, what do you want to measure? I mean, you know, it's the old saying is, you know, you don't get results until you start to measure stuff. Or there's somebody said it better than that. But, you know, you get results based upon what you measure. So, but, you know, statistics never lie, but liars use statistics. So it's the same idea. It's kind of like, well, so what do you want to measure? If you're measuring people's time, are you measuring output? I think anything, if you could get some sort of an output measure. You know, people over all these years have asked me and said, well, you know, what's the ROI for implementing your methodology in our company? And I go, well, what are you currently measuring? I don't know. Right? Well, tell me what you think is important, and I'll tell you whether or not this is going to help that or not. And very few people have even come close to even having their own answer to that question.
Do you see lots of like common answers in that scenario?
Common
answers when you say, what are you measuring? Do you see the same sorts of things being measured?
No, most people are like, they just aren't, they don't know what to measure, frankly. But now, that doesn't mean that people aren't measuring stuff. I mean, obviously they are measuring good stuff out there, and I'm just not aware of it that much.
I thought we should, it would be interesting to ask you a little bit about how you've structured your business and or slightly differently as well. It reminded me, obviously, is how a lot of startups, this sort of flat hierarchy, a lot of startups run with this idea of holacracy, like a role-based organization. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit, tell the audience a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, well, I ran across Brian Robertson 10 years ago. I was about to fold my company because I was trying to write my third book. I was trying to manage stuff. We were growing, and I was like, And so I tried to hire a CEO to handle stuff because I'm not the best player for that play. It didn't work out. It was painful. It was expensive. I said, there's got to be some way this organization can run itself. So I ran across Brian, who was one of the founders of what's called Holacracy, which is basically a role-based way. There are no titles. They're just roles that people have. And we've done that for 10 years. So that's how we've run our company. There are no titles. We have titles in case the outer world needs a title for somebody. But frankly, we just run ourselves. And we just organize it. It's a very rigorous. People think that's free-form stuff. It's not. It's very rigorous methodology that Brian, and company, figured out. So we've used that for years, and it works. That's we shrunk from 50 people to 5 because we wound up partnering with a bunch of partners and licensees around the world to distribute, so we could certify coaches and trainers to do our work around the world. So we were able to shrink ourselves to 5 people, basically an IP. Just an IP licensing company more than anything else. But we did that using that methodology. Everybody in the organization said, yeah, we understand why. And so it was quite transparent and quite real about how we did that. So
a lot of these people here from quite large corporations where that sort of structure, it might be difficult to implement that sort of structure.
Impossible.
Is it impossible? Okay.
Almost impossible.
So what can they do if it's impossible to do something like that?
Well, the trend is self-organizing organizations. So even in large organizations, they may have departments or divisions that themselves are starting to catch this idea that, wait a minute, let's be role-based here, not so hierarchical in terms of what they're doing. So it's a trend that you're not going to stop. How long it's going to take a large organization? Because, with the smaller organizations, and Holacracy has gotten fairly popular in Europe and even here in Amsterdam and the Netherlands, in a smaller organization, because you need whoever owns it or whoever the founder is has got to be willing to say, I'm going to let the organization, you can't play the founder's card. I can't play the founder. My wife and I sort of founded the company, but we can't go, well, because it's our company, we're not going to do that, even though you think you want to.
Going to take your ball away.
No, so we had to give that up. And trust that the purpose of the organization, trust that the organizational structure itself was good enough and flexible enough and real enough to get the stuff done that needed to get done. And it's great.
One thing I wanted to sort of draw a sort of natural end to, really, of the discussion, but is that someone in the audience asked a question regarding, I'll just say the question. Based on your experience, how is the technology gap between older generations and new generations, and how can it be, so what is the technology gap, and how could it be closed if there is one? I think that obviously there is one.
Oh.
But then I think it also reminded me of something you were point about when we were chatting before we did this, where you were talking about how it's a really good time to be alive at the moment if you know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think those two obviously, might be linked in a sort of slight way. So let's talk about the technology gap, if there is one. Do you see one?
Personally, my experience has really been down in the trenches, one-on-one with the executives. And frankly, most of them know how to type, even no matter how old they are. And even if they don't, they've got good staff around them that kind of manage all that stuff. So a lot of it depends on, by the time they get to a certain level, they've probably managed their life and managed their work well enough that they can get by, and there's no big gap, in terms of that. I didn't really see too much of a gap. The gaps I see with everybody out there called, wow, what am I supposed to do with Slack? Or, Teams? How do I do, what is Teams all about? What's a channel in Teams? So, and all those things could be quite beneficial, but that's just a gap. That's not an age gap. That's just a familiarity gap. So, I don't see it as age related. I see some, people that are in their look, I'll be 77 in a couple of months, so I'm still learning. I'm still I just had to get a lesson on Teams because now the new book we're writing is we're kind of managing the files in a team channel, so I had to figure that out.
I think it's only right and fair to give you an opportunity to mention the new book. Tell us about it.
New book, Getting Teams Done. So, for 40 years, people said, once they get my stuff, they get getting things done, they go, gee, wouldn't it be great if everybody around them got this? Life would be so much better. But I've never really had a good way or a manual about how do you take the principles of capturing, clarifying, organizing, reflecting on your commitments. Never been able to find a good way to sort of make a manual about that from a team basis. See, you could be really clear, Jeremy, and in control of your life, and I could be really clear and in control, but you and I get together, we are going to increase exponentially the complexity of our agreements. You're going to do what, by when, and how? But wait a minute, so the complexity goes up hugely if you're trying to then create these productivity best practices with more than yourself. But it can be done, and it has been done. And I'm co-authoring with my partner in London, who's been doing a lot of work with getting things done with senior teams and how that has affected the culture and how you could do that. But come on, guys, most of your issues are email and meetings. Meetings suck. They're not clear. They're not needed. Emails are unfortunate. Everybody gets, they're all kinds of things. And to a large degree, changing the standards of how you send emails and to whom, and meetings. We've got some companies that it is okay to deny a meeting invitation if the purpose of the meeting is not clear, your role to be in the meeting is not clear, or the time frame of the meeting is not clear. No. And those are the kinds of things that technology is not going to help that. You have to then agree on protocols and agree on how we're going to play together. And so there are best practices about that, and that's what we're writing about. So,
last question then. If it really is about, you've said about the most effective productivity computer is the brain, and if it's all about the person rather than the technology they're actually using, I'm really interested to know. You've met a lot of people, most of them probably horrendously unproductive, but you must have met a few productive people through the course of your life doing this thing. What qualities do these productive people share?
The strange thing about this, Jeremy, is the people most attracted to my work are the people who need it the least. They're already the most productive, aspirational, positively focused people you'll ever meet, truly. The head of the World Bank, Howard Stern, huge champion of my stuff, all kinds of very cool and very smart people. It's just that they've run out of room. They know that they know systems work because they've got them where they are. They know absolutely that they produce good work because they've done that. That got them where they are. They just are out of room. They're up to here. And they know they could produce more if they had more space. They know they could. I could do more. And so those are the people that the good news in my career is that I've had the opportunity to deal with some of the best and brightest folks simply because of that. And so, I think the productive people are people who are already there. You're not going to find somebody who's unproductive that's suddenly going to become a productive person. I think it would be a gradual process if at all.
But we can become. Don't leave us like that, David. We can become productive.
Forget it. It ain't worth it. Folks. Give it up. Have a beer.
And on that bombshell, listen. Honestly, that's tremendously entertaining. Ladies and gentlemen, please, David Allen.